And I still remember this guy. In fact, while you were talking, I looked him up. There was a guy who he actually played 15 years in the majors. The first 6 with the St. Louis Cardinals. His name was Jerry Mumphrey. Probably don't remember him. He was a center fielder, good fielder. But then he moved on to the Padres and the Yankees and the Astros and then the Cubs at the end. But I remember why the Cardinals got rid of Jerry Mumphrey. He was 26 years old, and he was always a good player. And his last year with the Cardinals, age 26, 1979, he hit .295, only 3 home runs, but he only drove in 32 runs. And that's what he did, 32 runs. The year before, he drove in 37 runs. The year before, 38. The year before, 26. He never drove in runs. He was not a clutch hitter. He'd get a hit. He would set the table, or he'd get a hit when it didn't matter. But I still remember Jerry Mumphrey, and they got rid of him because he only had 32 RBIs. Now, I don't hear RBIs being a big statistic anymore.
I'm sure they keep it still. Like, I'm sure it's still put on the back of people's baseball cards. It's just, I don't think it's scouted very much. I don't think it's all that important when you're in the minors to get a lot of RBIs in order to make it to the next level of competition. But I'll tell you, as a fan, if a guy has a lot of RBIs, if a guy's on pace to hit 100 RBIs, I call that a successful season. You'll have a guy that the 100 is your number. If you hit 100, that's a successful season. If you don't hit a number 100, that's maybe not so much for a guy who you have high hopes for as a power hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's not a very fair statistic to keep. I mean, I think about the 1979 St. Louis Cardinals. I mean, were they any good? That was a pretty bad era for the team, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were not good. In the 1970s, the Cardinals were awful. They really were. They had a bunch of mediocre players. They had some great players, but they had, for the most part, very mediocre players.
Was that the year that wasn't the year Keith Hernandez won the MVP, though, was it?
I'm not sure. It was around then. I think maybe a little later than that.
All right.
Let me see.
I just always found that really weird when the team, because I always thought that they were terrible in the 70s, but I thought they had an MVP in the 70s. That was him.
It was. I'm almost sure it was Keith Hernandez. If it wasn't 1979, it was right around there. Let's see. It was very good, 1979. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he drove in 105 RBIs, 48 doubles, 11 home runs, 105 RBIs. And he batted .344. His OPS was .930. So, yeah, he had a great year.
I think it's so crazy. That guy, he played so well, but he wasn't even most well known for playing for the Cardinals. He played for the Mets, right? His best years were at the Mets, right?
Yeah, they traded him to the Mets. Whitey Herzog, sure, he won a World Series with them, but he didn't like him on the team. And I read an interview with Keith Hernandez, and he admitted that he had a cocaine problem, and he wouldn't get help. And he did after he got onto the Mets, but Herzog didn't play that game. He didn't like that. Yeah, he was traded. Let's see here. I think Neil Allen is who they traded him to, if I remember correctly. I can't find it here, but yeah, here we go. Traded in 1983 by the St. Louis Cardinals to the Mets for Neil Allen and Rick Ownby, a starter and a closer, who neither one of them did very much.
And the Mets ended up winning maybe just one World Series in that span of time, but they were really good throughout that whole era with Hernandez and Strawberry and who else was on the Mets in the 80s? I wasn't alive then, so
Hernandez and Strawberry, yeah. They had the pitcher, the lights out pitcher. His name escapes me. I can't think of his name. But they did have a lot of good players. They were very good. But the Cardinals and the Mets were big time rivals back then.
Oh yeah, there was no Central Division, right?
No, the Cardinals were in the East.
Right.
The Cardinals were in the East, And it was the Cardinals, the Mets, the Phillies. I can't even remember. I don't remember. And the Atlanta Braves were in the West for whatever reasons. I don't know why they did that, but the standings were strange. I think they did it. I think they did that just so they had have some parity in baseball. But then things changed, and they figured out, let's make it more geographic. It's much better. So.
And I wonder if that was also a borrow because, well, that was in the '60s when the Braves moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta, and I was thinking maybe it's because of that, but not really. I mean,
yeah,
that's like 15 years or whatever. So,
well,
I was watching something yesterday, and I learned something that the Atlanta Braves are the oldest continuously operating baseball team in Major League Baseball. Everybody says it's the Cincinnati Reds, but it's not. It's the Atlanta Braves.
Really? Because they started in Boston.
No, they started in Cincinnati as the Cincinnati Red Stockings.
Really?
When they moved to Boston, they were called the Boston Red Stockings, and then they went through a bunch of team name changes, and they ended up being called the Boston Braves. Mm-hmm. Then they moved to Milwaukee, then they moved to Atlanta.
I didn't know that.
So I didn't know that either. I was assumed as the Cincinnati Reds. Now, what are now the Cincinnati Reds are also a very old baseball team, older than the Cardinals even, but they're not the oldest. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny because when the Boston Red Sox beat the St. Louis Cardinals in, what year was that?
04 and 13.
Okay. Well, the 04 is what I'm talking about. That was the first time the Boston Red Sox had won the World Series since they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. Because Babe Ruth started out with the Yankees. And they sold him. Or I'm sorry, Babe Ruth started out with Boston, and they traded him. They didn't trade him; they sold him to the New York Yankees, gave him away for money, and they called it the curse of the Bambino because they never won a World Series after that until they beat the Cardinals.
And he wasn't even traded as a great hitter. He was traded as a pitcher.
That's correct. He was a pitcher who also could hit. And the Yankees says, "Yeah, you're not going to pitch. You're too good of a hitter. We got to have you only hitting." So he was like the Ohtani of the day.
That's a weird story, and I would imagine that under the Shohei Ohtani situation, I just think that's so strange how you get a guy who's such a great hitter. And he's such a great pitcher. He can do both so well at such a high level. It's crazy. And why would they put him in the American League? But I guess they have DHs everywhere now. But
well, he's the DH. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, he's a Japanese baseball player, Shohei Ohtani, and he never did he ever play in Japan, or did he come right over here?
I think he played professionally in Japan.
Okay, because he's only 26. And he's been here for quite some time, but they brought him over here and they said, this guy's going to be the first two-way player in a long time. I thought, okay, fine. Yeah, he played for the Nippon Ham. He's been playing since 2013. He came over here in 2018, but he hits a lot of home runs and he's a good pitcher too, which is kind of, unheard of. Pitcher, good hitting pitcher now hits 200.
They do the thing that you see, when a kid's playing CY or Little League ball, where the pitcher gets taken out of the game and they put him in left field.
Right.
They keep him in the game so he can hit.
That's exactly right. Well, this year Ohtani is he's 2-1 as a pitcher with an ERA of 3.19. So he's having a good year. I'm sorry, an ERA of 2.76. And he's got 17 home runs as well. Now, how many pitchers have 17 home runs? Most pitchers don't have 17 home runs for their career. But that's just he's an anomaly. But but Babe Ruth was the Shohei Ohtani of his day.
Right. He could probably eat more hot dogs than Shohei Ohtani as well. So.
Probably so. Well, let me ask you before this podcast gets too old. Who's your favorite baseball player of all times and why?
My favorite of all time. I guess I would have to go with Barry Bonds. I just probably because of the era that I watched the game. I just remember the game in the '90s and the 2000s when Barry Bonds was just he was larger than life. He was just a monster of a player. They built a stadium for him in San Francisco with a relatively short porch in right field, so that all he had to do was just hit the ball just in the air, and it would just end up in the ocean. He was just a monster player. You talk about guys wearing the body armor. He had the big RoboCop armor all over his right arm I guess, to protect himself. But I remember, man, I hated him at the time. I did not like Barry Bonds, but I always thought that would be really cool to be able to hit the ball as far as that guy did. And I think it's a shame he's not in the Hall of Fame. He belongs in there. He's the greatest player of his era. He hit more home runs than anybody. Um, Apparently, he was a smaller guy when he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates earlier in his career, and so he would be able to, cover the field and the outfield, steal some bases, which is impressive. I just don't remember that era. That's all. So I would have to go with Barry Bonds.
Here, when Barry Bonds started out, he was 6'1", 185. That's basically me. I'm 6 feet 185. Now I bet when he was done playing, he was probably 285, and mostly muscle.
In his era, I totally get it. I mean, the guy was also known for taking performance-enhancing drugs, allegedly, and his reputation is tarnished because of that. I think that's unfortunate because, if it is true that he did it, it's also true that a lot of power hitters back in those days did a lot of performance-enhancing drugs. A lot of them have admitted to it. Mark McGwire was I was a big fan of Mark McGwire growing up. He admitted to having done that.
Mm-hmm.
So many other players had done that, and for the Hall to make an example out of him by not allowing him into the Hall of Fame, I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame because I don't even think a lot of people say, why don't you just put him in the Hall with an asterisk next to his name? No, because he was a great player. He doesn't need an asterisk. I just think he belongs in there, period.
I do too. And did he take steroids? First of all, it's never been proven. But just look at the guy. Sure, he took steroids, but many players did. And Major League Baseball knew they were. But they kept him because hitting all those home runs was exciting. I mean, last year Barry Bonds played, he was 42 years old. Hit 28 home runs, led the league in walks that year, led the league in intentional walks that year. Regular walks and intentional walks. Yeah, no, then they didn't want to pitch to him. Hit 28 home runs, 66 RBIs at age 42. Would have still been playing, but I think he got hurt and then said, that's enough. I've earned enough money. But he has more home runs, more walks, more intentional walks than anybody ever. And he absolutely, positively does belong in the Hall of Fame. Anybody who disagrees, I'd like to have a discussion with him because I don't get it. So what if he took steroids? A lot of people took steroids back then. It was accepted, and Major League Baseball knew it was happening.
Exactly.
So,
and how about you, James? Who's your favorite player?
I have to go back a whole lot further. I'm going to say Bob Gibson. And the reason I say Bob Gibson is because, oh, by the way, Barry Bonds earned $188 million in his career. So, yeah, I guess after 42, he didn't have to play anymore. But, no, Bob Gibson, he was a man's man. He was the best pitcher I ever saw. He's the only player in Major League Baseball history where they changed the rules because of him. In 1968, he had the 1.12 earned run average, lowest ever recorded. And they lowered the mound because they thought, you know what, these people can't compete against this guy. And actually, there were a lot of pitchers who had similar numbers, but none close to Gibson. But they lowered the mound because of Bob Gibson. Can you think of a person they changed the rules for because of him? And
it was specifically him.
Well, I say that, and that's a little silly because there were a lot of players. It was not uncommon to have an ERA under 2. A lot of ball players had an ERA under 2. That wasn't super uncommon. It was uncommon for anybody to hit any more than about 10 home runs. It was uncommon